Hello, everybody. Welcome to Watches with Dennis. And hopefully, I got this all working right. Well, I always test it with my cell phone because I always have this paranoia ever since I streamed on Twitch that I won't have my settings correct. So we always do a little bit of a test. So let me see if I can get that loaded up here. And looks like at least my head's there. Is my sound working? Yep, it is. All right, excellent. Well, we don't need to hear me in echo because that's creepy. All right, so today, what I wanted to do is discuss the Holy Trinity votes that we did. For those that saw my recording or caught the live stream that I last did, I don't remember when that was. I guess it was just about a week ago. Uh, wasn't one of the topics we were going to discuss. I think a lot of people kind of like to debate it from time to time, but it wasn't really something I had planned on. But that was Holy Trinity, Patek Philippe, Audemars Piguet, Vacheron Constantin, and then of course discussion evolved into, well, if we were to change the Holy Trinity, like what would we like to see in there versus what the current makeup is? And of course, discussion was pretty wide ranging in terms of a variety of suggestions. I think there probably were at least a dozen, which isn't particularly surprising. But one of the suggestions that came up during that stream was maybe we should have a poll and see what viewers want in terms of the Holy Trinity. My problem with doing a poll like that is by doing it through YouTube, which is what I thought, well, this is a YouTube channel, so let's do it through YouTube. Only problem, of course, with YouTube is their polling features, while real easy to use, are also exceedingly limited. So I could do no more than 5 options, and because of that, I didn't have a convenient way. Like if I was doing a Survey Monkey, for example, we could have gone in and I could have asked questions like, do you want to keep any of the current 3, or do you like the current 3, or which ones do you want to pull out and who would you swap those for? And people could have chosen from a list or typed in additional options. And instead, I had to be limited in this regard. And so what I did is I took 5 of the suggestions that came up during the live stream discussion. But again, as I noted, that wasn't even half of the names that were thrown out. So all of this is just a big excuse in terms of that it's not as comprehensive as we might like. But we'll go into that data in a little bit. But I've learned with these live streams that people tend to trickle in over time. So we won't start with analyzing the results. We'll start with the Holy Trinity just sort of generically. But I see people are popping on. So hey, Neff, welcome to the live stream, and Kevin as well. I remember Kevin from last week. And oh yes, see, Neff, I did it. It's not just good timing. I thought, I don't know. I really don't know live stream stuff with YouTube very well, which probably shows. I've used, and I'm using StreamYard. Obviously, it's branded here because I don't use it very much. So why pay? I like it because it pulls up the little chat things, which I think is kind of cool for sort of a talking head style approach like this. My background in streaming, which isn't a particularly impressive background, is on Twitch. I live stream how to play pinball, or well, I'm not a great player, but I would live stream pinball play. So I'm familiar with OBS and streaming on the Twitch platform, and it works very, very differently. So I just sort of go live, and pinball people are really kind of loyal to pinball. So if you go live as a pinball channel, you just get people. I'm not a lot, but you get viewers because there ain't very many. Or back when I was playing online, there weren't very many streamers. Now there are quite a few. But the interesting thing with this is I went ahead and I scheduled it yesterday to be today because I thought, well, maybe that would help people if I actually schedule it. Because normally I throw these together in an hour and it's like, here it goes. So anyway, Holy Trinity. So the first thing I think before we go over the results, and don't worry, we won't belabor this too long, is let's talk a little bit about the existing Holy Trinity, because when I got into watches, I didn't know anything about the Holy Trinity. I still actually don't know all that much, really, in the sense that I've never owned any of these watches. The Holy Trinity watches are all very, very expensive. Unless you go vintage, you might be able to get a reasonable deal. But again, not what I would ever call an affordable or a cheap deal per se. But so of the 3, whenever I've seen these other sort of discussions, and when we talked about this on the last live stream, my general impression is Patek Philippe is like, it's the one Holy Trinity player that most people that I've heard from still seem to feel it should still be Holy Trinity. And you can kind of see from this is just their homepage. And you can see the some of the animation, some of the motion works that are going on. But the reasons I think are pretty obvious. The general rule of thumb with existing Holy Trinity companies is they have to be Swiss. They have to do hot horology or high horology or complication. So you can kind of see from this current movement that's up on the screen, a very complicated style watch. And there's usually an established pedigree, no brand new companies. I think, and again, it was not like people just made definitions and then threw things in the Holy Trinity. I kind of think they established a Holy Trinity and then they made definitions that fit those three. So companies of at least a century of production, so over 100 years old. I see Neff has said something about that. The pinball stream would be fun. I've never used Twitch, but I'll have to check it out. Yeah, if you ever load up, you can get an app on your phone for Twitch and just search pinball, and then they have a channel there's an established channel of pinball, and that's virtual pinball is in that, but most of the streamers are playing physical machines, and it's really impressive the streaming setups because there's usually at least 3 cameras. There's a face cam like this, like what I'm using with you all. There's usually a camera pointed at the dot matrix display or the score display. Modern games use LCD displays. Sometimes they get direct video output for those. And then you need a camera to capture the playfield, of course, so you can see the ball whipping around. And so some of these streamers have invested thousands of dollars in cameras because you need so many of them to do this. And they build mobile rigs. I mean, I own 7 games myself, but there are people with dozens of pinball machines. Just have entire game rooms of them. And some of them are some of the most successful streamers. So anyway, Patek, it's got the pedigree. It's Swiss. No one disputes that they make really high-end watches. As Neff has noted here, that Patek deserves it for sure. Unfortunately, the Swiss part leaves out a lot of really good brands in Germany, Moritz, Grossmann, and A. Lange & for example. And we will be getting to that because we did not put any such limitation on our poll. The biggest complaint I've ever really seen about Patek is that when you go to their lower end watches, which again, as we've noted, are still really expensive. I don't think Patek has a single unisex/male targeted watch that is under $10,000 MSRP. So it's an expensive company. But the complaint. So the complaint I most commonly hear about Patek is on their, I'm going to do my air quotes, lower end watches. They do not finish them very well. And so it's kind of like you end up, you want to buy into the brand. And so you buy one of the least expensive Pateks and you flip it over and it is surprisingly unimpressive, I guess, for the price point compared to what other brands can get you. A. Lange & is a good example of that. So anyway, so Patek's one, probably I would say, if people ask me to rank them, I say Patek is the king, the top dog of the triad of the Trinity. They're not equal parts. They're not a perfect Triforce from Legend of Zelda. There's one peak that's higher than the others, and that's Patek. So Audemars Piguet. Audemars Piguet, really, really established brand. Clearly, they're doing something with, I think that's Serena Williams, showing a variety of watches and tennis balls. But again, really well-known dress watch company. Of course, nowadays, this one gets a little more tarnished. And when I hear people talk about changes to the Holy Trinity, Audemars is often one that's commonly cited for removal. And the reason is that, well, what are we looking at on her wrist? These are all a variety of royal oaks. It has become the Royal Oak Company. And in fact, if we go to their collections, and it's been a while since I've looked. I had not checked this ahead of time, but I think this is going to bear fruit. So let's see. We've got code. I can't read this. Code 1159. Why do they do fonts like this? All right. So we got that. All right. That's not a Royal Oak. Then we got what? Royal Oak Offshore, Royal Oak Concept. So we're up to 3. That's it. So here we go. Their current collections, they have 4 of them. 3 of them are Royal Oaks. So when people say that Audemars Piguet is just the Royal Oak Company, it's not literally true, but it almost is. I mean, this is 75% of their collections, and that's not even diving in. If we start looking at the number of models of Royal Oak Offshore and Concept compared to the number of models of Code 1159, I think we know that the balance of power is going to still remain with the Royal Oaks. So that's probably why AP ends up on that chopping block. It's definitely why I would say, I mean, the Royal Oak is a nice watch. It's not one of my, like, it's grown on me a bit over, like, I like it way more than the Nautilus. I always did. When I first got into watches, I really didn't like the look of the Royal Oak, and it's still just not one that speaks to me, but I can appreciate it. And I see Neff agrees about the AP issue. And again, it's a very common one. I'm not treading new ground with criticism on it. as well as his point that they have the watch you have to buy to get a Royal Oak, and then the Royal Oaks. Yeah, yes, yes. Oh, when the code 1150, I didn't know about it when it first came out, but when code 1159 first started getting discussed, I went back and saw, coverage, read report, and a lot of people really felt it was a very, they get a fashion watch vibe to it. I actually kind of like the look of the code. I like the code 1159's looks better than the Royal Oaks, but they're really expensive too. So, and I don't like them that much. I mean, what are we looking at here? Of course, there's the precious metals, which are helping drive up some of these prices. And but the design, some of the design language kind of feels very, and of course we're looking at chronograph, so this is unfair, but it gives me kind of a Breitling sort of feel. This 430 date window, very zenith of them. So it kind of feels like they kind of were a magpie and they took little bits of other watch companies' concepts and put it together in their own sort of automobile package, which is okay. It's just when we're talking, it's just not what people want though. They do have a number of models, more than I would have initially thought. But again, like you look at these and it's like, I, I see why they're not doing well. Let's put it that way. I see why people just say, well, I just want a Royal Oak. I don't really want the Blancpain wannabe. Um, and design from Aruba. Yes, welcome. Welcome to the live stream. We're going to go over a poll result on the Holy Trinity, but we're walking through the current Holy Trinity because I didn't want the video to be 5 minutes long. So we're dragging it out. We're dragging it out. Don't worry, we won't drag it out too long. No one wants to hear me prattle on that long. So then the third one of these Holy Trinity ones, for those that don't know, is, you can tell I loaded these like hours ago in my little incognito window, so I would remember them later while I was working from home, is Vacheron Constantin. So Vacheron, again, not a company I'm super familiar with. It's of the current three Holy Trinity, I've seen the market numbers. It's definitely the least successful currently in terms of like revenue generation, all of that stuff. Oldest, I believe, oldest continuous watch manufacturer in the world. So a very, very, very established brand. I think their modern problem, I'm not saying they're hurting or anything, just their modern problem is their overseas watch, which is their sports watch. It's not, the Genta, Royal Oak, and Nautilus. It just doesn't have that same Instagram hype. So while those watches became harder to get, those overseas watches became much harder to get during the pandemic. They're not that level. It's like, if you want a Holy Trinity watch and you want to buy one new, Vacheron's the company you're going to be able to get it from with the least amount of effort, is kind of the thing. Some of their other stuff actually, but I mean, they do really neat high-end complication watches. But honestly, most of the time, again, it's not the high-end stuff that a lot of people talk about. The overseas is what I usually see the most posting of. And then there was that weird driver watch. I'm scrolling. I should have looked at this thing, the 1921. Now this is cool. I really like this. They, especially because they didn't crop any of the numbers. Those Breitlings, like the Breitling Pistachio, really, that watch grew on me. At first, I kind of thought it looked like a pea soup baby puke color dial, but then pistachios are my favorite nut, so I was biased, but it grew on me. But they use their various subdials and they cut into the main numerals. I can't stand that. So, and that has not grown on me. So I've not been able to accept any watch that crops its main numerals. So you just need to not do them. Just don't print the number at all. That's my philosophy. But I see Nefa said he would keep Vacheron in the Trinity. They do enough finishing and complications as a mass market brand to earn the stripes. And that's something I know a lot of defenders of Vacheron have pointed out, is that Vacheron actually, of the three, arguably is the best way to get into a lot of high horology finishing, refinement, and not have to play the same games you might have to play with AP or Patek. And Orange Hand, welcome Orange Hand, says Vacheron's best watches are the historique line. And I gotta say, but based off the ones I've seen, they definitely speak to me. But then again, isn't that often the case for most of the watches nowadays? Is it not, when they go to the back catalog, that they seem to find the most success? The attention that Zodiac is getting now. And of course, we saw that watch we talked about a little bit last week, the Longines diver watch that is a throwback style from the 60s. There's a lot and hey, I'm all for it. I would much rather see companies mine their back catalog than come up with something really goofy, or just seeing another company just homage everything left and right. So that's where all that stands. So let's go ahead and throw up. I put it as an image. So there we go. I got it. All right, good. I was hoping I positioned this stuff so my stupid head was not in the way, but if it was, I would just make myself disappear. So this is what we had. I pulled from my YouTube studio the results. As I don't know if any more votes came in since I did this. I put this together this afternoon. But so we had 75 votes on the poll that I launched on June 4th after the last live stream to say, what companies do you think, if you were to put something else in, we weren't asking you to say like you wanted to take AP out, or I couldn't. The polls are not that flexible on YouTube. It's not SurveyMonkey, but I was allowed to have 5 options. And so based off of the last discussion on the live stream we had, there were 5 companies that I distinctly remember having conversation. And that was A. Lange & Söhne, FP Journe, Grubel Forsey, JLC, and Rolex. And remember, when we were having, well, some of you might not have been on, but if you were on, you would remember, hopefully, that we had no rules. Didn't have to be a company that was over 100 years old or making watches for over 100 years. Didn't have to be Swiss. Didn't have to be high complication. Didn't have to meet a certain price point. We had no criteria whatsoever. It was just, what do you think should be in a Holy Trinity? And I think we had about a dozen choices. I think someone in those 2 comments, one of those is my reply. I think someone went in there and said they wished Grand Seiko was a choice, I believe was what that was. And of course, Grand Seiko actually didn't come up in our live stream discussion, though, especially since they released a complicated watch for this year's Watches and Wonders. It would make sense that they would be in consideration. So that's what we've got. And you can already see we had a tie with JLC and Rolex for second and third. And first place was A. Lange & Söhne. But I wanted to spend a little bit of time about talking about the 2 that did not win. And I see Design has said Patek Philippe, Lange & Söhne, Vacheron, in that order for him with build quality. And I think if I remember what I said on I don't think I ranked them during the live stream. I said I would have Patek in as well. I would have A. Lange & Söhne. I would get rid of Vacheron and I'd bring in JLC. Those would be mine. And I think my order would be JLC at the bottom, Patek in the middle, and I would actually put Lange & Söhne at the top. I think, especially, and for me, the reason is just that even if you buy their cheapest watch, they do high-end finishing as much on the movement of their cheapest watch as they do their most expensive watch, and Patek does not do that. And maybe that's an unfair distinction. Maybe Patek's engineers are better overall, but hey, we all get to make our own lists, so that's the arbitrary thresholds that I would do. And I see Neff agrees with Designs, Patek, ALS, and VC, and Orange Hand. This one I knew was going to be controversial, so I was glad to include it, which is no way Rolex should make the list. If Audemars Piguet is all Royal Oaks, Rolex is all Oyster Perpetuals. Cases are pretty much the same, even though I love Rolex. And I completely agree. Other than and I believe now discontinued, Cellini line, I mean, that's the thing when I've watched other high-end collectors, I shouldn't say other, when I've watched high-end collectors who show off their collections on YouTube, and I see like it's like the Seiko thing, but with just Rolexes, and I look at them, but at least the Seikos look different a lot of time. I mean, unless you get like every flavor of Alpinist, I guess. But when I see all Rolexes, I always think it looks so samey, and it's because of the case. I mean, you can get different sizes, but that Oyster case, it's a good look. I own 2 myself, but I don't like. I'm not after a third for a reason. They look the same. They look the same. Actually, I thought Rolex would be more complicated, more controversial because of the lack of complications too. But and as Orange Noy, longest history dates to the early 1990s. You need more heritage than that. No. And again, that's something some people have pointed to as longest shouldn't count, because even if we could get past that they're German, they're too new. And you could have an argument about, well, it's a continuation of the flow. But no, you're absolutely right, Orange Hand. I don't think it's fair to trace them earlier than the 90s, regardless of whatever historic pieces were used to rebuild that company. But again, I think, and this is just me, if I were doing Holy Trinity stuff, I don't really care about the heritage. As long as the brand is respected, then I think you've achieved enough. But that's just me. Like the heritage is normally tied into brand identity because the heritage is part of the legacy of their quality or whatever. But Longa has sort of jumped all of that by doing high-end horology. And I don't think anyone denies that they do hot horology. Um, and I think because of that and just the level of reception for that, it it bears fruit. It bears fruit. That said, on the secondhand market, ALS watches take a bigger hit than the real Holy Trinity do for a reason, and that might be that lack of history. And yes, yeah, I agree. Personally, I never personally consider Rolex as a Holy Trinity contender, but it came up in the discussion. And it came up quite a bit, and there's some people that think that's the case. So, and I see Neff has noted that Rolex did used to do complications, and they do. So, I mean, it's a question of what's our threshold, right? So, like, I mean, a chronograph is a complication. Technically, a date wheel is a complication. Anything more than time only is a complication. Is it complicated enough? We get to debate that. So let's talk a little bit about the two that failed in the vote. So Grubel 4C, as you recall, had 1% of the vote. And I'm not too surprised. This is actually let me scroll past my head a little bit. So while these watches are obviously, you can just tell from the dials, extremely complicated and very high end, you can see on the web page itself, 3 pieces a year, 2 to 3 pieces a year, 2 to 3 pieces a year. At that level of production, I'm not surprised it had next to no votes. This was the one in the list that I had no familiarity with. I heard of the name. That was it. If you told me Grubel, I didn't even know what watch to picture. But this is clearly a high-end independent watchmaker. But I think based off of these, I mean, some of these are, here we go, 198 pieces. But again, when you're that low production, I mean, that's one thing about again, it's not a requirement of the rules, but do people have an expectation that a Holy Trinity contender needs to have at least a certain amount of production? 1,000 units? I don't know. 100 units? I don't know what the rules are. And his design has noted here saying, boys, if quality is the highest consideration, Ulysse Nardin, Richard Mille, and Glashut Original need your attention. And that's a really interesting point because I'm not talking about Grubel. Let me de-zoom us, and you can just see my poor face. And I would agree. I mean, well, now I have no familiarity with Richard Mille. Glashut, I've been sorely tempted to get. In some ways, actually, I think that their Pano line, the Pano Reserve and the Pano Lunar, have a better asymmetrical dial layout than the Longa one is for ALS. I've really been torn on. There are a few. I actually went through because someone challenged me to do it, and looked at the ALS Longa one, and then looked at Gio's Pano series, and marked like which parts I liked more on the ALS and which I liked more on the Gio. And the Gio actually got more things right for me than I mean, they're both, I think, very attractive watches, but it's a very good point. And Ulysse Nardin, I know there are a few I've seen some people on YouTube who really, really love it. It's an interesting one because they have some really impressive high-end watches, and then they kind of have like that porn watch line. That's perhaps unfair, erotic watch line that to some people might cheapen the brand because it seems like it's a little bit of a novelty for such a high-end watchmaker to be doing that in this day and age. But anyway, as Neff has noted here, so Grubel 4C is just in the clouds. Good luck affording one or buying a new one. And I didn't even pull the prices. I knew the moment I loaded these and saw the production count that, that this was going to be an issue. But so anyway, only 1% of the vote, but super low production company. And in fact, the other one that lost the vote, remember we had 5 choices, was FP Journe. I think it was an obvious one to include on the list. FP Journe has been a red hot commodity watch for quite a while now. Again, pretty low production. I think they output about 700 watches a year. So not an insignificant count, but I mean, next to the Holy Trinity, that is really, really sparse. The existing Holy Trinity, really, really sparse amount of watches. And let me hit some of these other comments here real quick. So back on Ulysse Nardin, the perpetuals are great, and he even likes the erotic watches. So, and I bet they sell. I mean, otherwise, why would the company continue to produce them? Designers know the handling, the finish and tolerances on Ulysse is incredible. Buy pre-owned. And I think I've taken a couple looks at that. I don't have a particular model of a UN watch that I've known that like I need to just look at the catalog and see if there's anything that really catches my eye. But you know, it uh, it just sort of is what it is. I see Review Master is here. Hello, Review Master. Welcome to the live stream. A watch is for telling time for most people, but some people buy them for their poser value. That's a good point. And in fact, and it's unfair of me because I don't know anyone's motivations in terms of why they own a particular watch or they don't. And so, yeah, I have that same gut instinct when we were talking about. I talked about this a little bit on the last live stream too, but when I see someone who just owns Rolexes, my first thought isn't that they are a watch fan. It's that it's one of two things. I can't say which thought actually enters my brain first. It's either that it's status and they know people know Rolex and they're flexing like mad. And then the alternative is that they're really, really concerned about losing value on watches, and they are assured that they feel confident that Rolex values most likely won't dip or they won't dip much. And of course, people can collect for their own reasons. That being said, and no, I don't. In terms of your post, no, it's fair. I'm not offended by it. I think the thing is, though, is like if someone were to buy this FP Journe, other than a watch nerd, who would know that this is expensive? Like, it's not only the Instagram watches, the hype watches. I think people who buy a Nautilus, a Royal Oak, a Rolex, they might be buying it because they really like that watch. But you might also think they're buying it because they want to either reflect wealth or pretend to have wealth. Buying an FP Journe or an H Mosier, it's just too obscure, in my opinion. I don't think most people will buy those because they, the normal folk don't know what those watches are. They just don't. So that's sort of where I'm at on it. Now back to the topic of FP Journe, though. Neff has posted, Journe's finishing isn't comparable to, say, Vacheron or Patek, but they do some great complications, and I love how thin they all are. And Review has noted, it's true the exotics do hold and or appreciate in value. Sure. And again, some people get into this for investment purposes, and and that's, I can't say it's not right or wrong. It's just that's a way people can do it. It's up to everyone how they do it. FP Journe. My attraction to FP Journe, I've looked at a few of them. I cropped the 7. I hate that. My only issue really with Journe is not issue, I should say. The thing I like is kind of the asymmetrical sort of approach that's taken on some of the watch dials. And I'm a fan of well-executed asymmetry, kind of a change from me being very, very symmetrical in a lot of design things that I like. Maybe part of that's my pinball background, where symmetry is often the most visually attractive, but the best pinball games are asymmetrical by design. And there's a reason why we do not see modern pinball machines using symmetrical layouts. Like the flipperless playfield on my wall behind me, that is a symmetrical layout. Aesthetically, very, very balanced. Gameplay wise, not that great. Plus, no flippers, so wasn't what we consider as modern pinball anyway. But that's not what this channel is about. I have podcasts to talk about that stuff. Design has said, FYI, Richard Mille movements are produced by RE and Poppy, same as Audemars Piguet's manufacturer, but with better materials and remarkably more solid build, just too expensive. Yeah, and again, that's one that, everyone knows that all the like race car drivers wear them, and it's one of those that kind of gets in that weird status. I know I've always heard they're really well built, but I think they're ugly. So I've never looked at them. I know they're expensive. I don't know how much, because I would never want one, even though they weren't expensive. Just not my style. I don't like skeletonized dials at all. I don't like open heart designs. And I see them, the ones that Hodinki's like, these are well executed, these look good. And I'm like, no, to me, they do not. I don't know of a single skeletonized watch I like at all. And Neff has said, Journe does great asymmetry. The vagabondages are so discreetly asymmetric. Love those watches. Yeah, I read about those, one of those back. Really hard to get those, though, because they sell them to the people who already own them first. So very, very challenging. So let's jump back to the poll, if I can get my mouse. I'm doing 2 screens here. Okay. So I was going to do whatever one came in third first, but of course we have a tie with Rolex and JLC. So we will, what order did I choose? I set them all up ahead of time. Oh, good. I started with Rolex, the boring one. Okay. So this one obviously was going to be the most controversial because Rolex is not, it is over 100 years old. It is Swiss. At least it's been Swiss for over 100 years. But they don't do high complications. They don't do high horology. They, you know, they use close casebacks for their movements. The movements do have finishing on them, which for a mass-produced watch is good, but it's not great finishing because, again, no one's really admiring it other than your watchmaker. They all tend to have the same case. What's the most complicated watch that that Rolex currently makes? My gut would be to say the Daytona because it's a chronograph. Maybe the Sky Dweller. I don't know what the features are on it, quite frankly. But the reason why Rolex came up, why I had to put it in the poll, while I felt I should put it in the poll, was it came up a lot in the last live stream discussion because there were a lot of people who said that in their view, Holy Trinity really needs to consider what the people, broadly speaking, want. And if you're a watch person or you're not a watch person, you know about Rolex. Like if people want to be a poser or flex or get a piece that they don't think will depreciate or whatever, they know that Rolex is the brand that's first comes to mind. My very first nice luxury watch that I bought was a used Rolex because it was the only brand I knew of that. Oh yeah, that's a high quality watch, right? I mean, it's the only one I knew. It's the only one I'd heard of. I didn't research those things. I was just buying something used because I had had success professionally and I wanted a watch to celebrate that. And so that's why I think a lot of people really wanted that to be included. And so I did. And clearly there was a lot of support for that logic that the Holy Trinity maybe isn't about high horology and isn't about price, though it's Rolex is getting kind of expensive. I'm sorry, I've been scrolling because I was trying to see, do they still make the Sky Dweller? I'm not finding it in my. Okay, there we go. I don't know why. Maybe they put it in another classic. I wanted to get a look at it because I've never really looked at one. Sorry, don't mean to be quiet.
The Rolex Oyster Perpetual Sky Dweller.
I didn't want you to talk. I just wanted a quiet video. Just keep clicking on stuff until I get a good view. There we go. There we go. This is the sort of thing I wanted. All right. Because I'd seen Heater, welcome to the live stream. Heater said Sky Dweller in response to my most complicated. And Neff said either Sky Dweller or the Yachtmaster. I see Orange Hand had said, with current indies like Journe, jury's out on whether they will survive when the founder is gone. And that's a good point. I mean, I guess the Genta name lives on as a brand, or it was for a while, but I've heard about other ones where the lead designer dies and the brand becomes a shell of itself. I mean, I suppose it could live on just making, back catalog stuff as long as people can execute the movements. There's always the legacy, I suppose, but what's really the point in a independent living on after that? Remains to be seen. Another thing with Journe that confuses it, I think, a little, just to me, is I have heard reports, I've not confirmed this, I've heard reports that because they only make about 700 watches a year, there has been one or maybe more of the gray market dealers that have been basically cornering the market, and that's been driving up the prices. So how much of Journe's current pricing is really that, oh, great, everyone just wants it now and it's become the latest hotness, and how much of it is artificial inflation driven by secondhand people that are relatively capable of acquiring that many watches? I mean, it is a brand you could corner conceivably. It's actually mathematically not that hard if you had the cash. Would be the thought. Orange Hand says Rolex is the king of the watch industry and the top brand of anything in the world. Best watch, not so much. And I agree. It's a question of, is Trinity about the best built, best, most robust, or most complicated? And robustness is an interesting one as well, because obviously Orange Hand said best watch, didn't say most robust, but I'm pivoting it a little bit because one of the things that Rolex is often praised for is one of the few watch companies operating that does 10-year 10-year service intervals as a recommendation on their watch. Most companies recommend a lot more frequent. Not all. There's I know others have tried to get into the 10-year game and have, but I mean, it's just Rolex's ability. It's almost like Timex in the takes a licking kind of thing. That reputation is something some people are like, that's like Patek's not doing that. So nanny boo boo sort of thing, I guess. Neff says Sky Dweller is cool. It's an annual calendar GMT, and you use a fluted bezel to set it. Okay, thank you. I didn't know anything about it. Other than it does look cool. Design says, okay, here's the thing. Who set the standard for Holy Trinity? A group of experts and connoisseurs? If I became one and Grand Seiko snuck in, is it Holy Trinity now? If you snuck Grand Seiko in. Now here's my guess. Because again, I don't know. In my research a long time ago, like last year on Holy Trinity, my take is, and this happens again, I hate to do my other hobby analogies. Well, no, I don't hate it because I keep doing it. But it's the same thing with pinball. There's a lot of terms we use. They're not defined by anyone. It's like it's almost grassroots. At some point, and I think it was maybe back in the 70s, there just started to be an expression of Holy Trinity, and it ended up being used for Patek, Audemars, and Vacheron. And I think since then, people have tried to say, what do these three things have in common to come up with why it ended up being that way? And maybe that wasn't the original motivation, but it's sort of like, well, we're using this term, we must have a definition, right? And so in pinball, some examples of this were a game with a fan layout. That means a very certain type of setup with a float, kind of mimics like a Japanese folding fan. But specifically in a game, what does that mean? I think it's sort of the same thing. I think people heard an article or something, or collectors say Holy Trinity, and then boom, we end up with these three. And then people are like, okay, well, they're all Swiss, so that must be a requirement. They're all over 100 years old. That must be a requirement. Like they all do things like minute repeaters and tourbillons and all this. And, so high complication and finishing on the movement, and there was like, that was check. So you check all these boxes and then boom, there you go. There's Holy Trinity. But then someone else comes along and goes, but JLC does all of that. And then you maybe counter and go, yeah, but JLC only did movements for a really long time. Like they haven't been making watches all that long. So even though the company's been around a long time, maybe they don't really meet the date definition. And then you might say, well, Langenzonen clearly does all this stuff. I'm like, no, they're too young and they're German. No, we can't count the Germans. Grand Seiko, no, we can't. Grand Seiko can never be it because they're not Swiss. They'd have to move to Switzerland and then they could be it. And then you could say something like Rolex, which is like, well, it's old enough, it's Swiss. And then it's like, they're not complicated enough. You see, there's always a way to keep everyone out, I guess. But there's not a committee, as near as I can tell, that decides this. Heater said the Rolex Cellini does do a moon phase. I had heard, I've not confirmed this, that the Cellini line is no longer made. So I guess maybe now we couldn't count them again because, well, they don't do complicated anymore. And then Orange Hand is suggesting a possible gray market doing the cornering. I wasn't going to name names, mostly because I didn't remember which one did it. But but if it's Watchbox, it's Watchbox. I don't know. Remaster says, my father had clients who were mainly surgeons. Dad would say, that guy there is wearing a luxury home on his wrist. And he'd just chuckle. Yeah, I mean, I bought my house before I bought a luxury watch. And my watches are not worth more than my house. So the Nefes said, is there an actual Trinity that was created by the collectors? I've never heard. I don't know where I think I read, I don't know who did the research. I had read, maybe it was a Hodinkee article or another watch blog or something, had indicated that they had found references to the Holy Trinity dating back a few decades, I think back to the 70s. And maybe that had something to do with the response to the quartz crisis and who was sticking with mechanical. And I don't know. I don't know. But there's clearly not like an avant-garde de Swiss group that's like gatekeeping this. But the problem is now we have this definition of Holy Trinity. We all know what three they are. And then everyone is like, but should it still be those three? That there's not actually a process to change it. So in reality, there is no changing the Holy Trinity. That's the bottom. I mean, if we be blunt and circumvent the entire joy of the intellectual exercise it is, the Holy Trinity will always be the Holy Trinity unless, in my view, unless one of them goes out of business. and then another one can come in because people will still want there to be 3 because people like 3s. But that's it. That's the only thing. And Neff also has noted, heck, JLC made movements for all of the Holy Trinity brands for years. The first Royal Oak had one. The first Nautilus 3700 had it, and that's a good point. And in fact, that's part of the reason why I think JLC came up. And as a reminder, I got Windows. We'll manage this. All right. So tied with Rolex was JLC. In fact, early on, before we had the 75 votes where I cut off and did this, the JLC was leading over Rolex, which made sense to me. But the voters are the voters, and we respect the voters. So let's talk about JLC. And this is, no, I don't want to speak to your ambassador. We're talking to YouTube. So talk about, I mean, it's both a well-known company amongst collectors. Broadly speaking, I know lots of non-watch people that will recognize the Reverso, but they do so much more. They really, really flex on their high horology capabilities. I mean, I think any of you who've seen any clips from 2021's Watches and Wonders will remember their quad-facing Reverso, ultra complicated, like $1.2 million. We're making 12 of these perpetual calendar minute repeater things. It was amazing. I remember one of my earliest videos I did was about that reveal, just because it was so ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't fathom anyone buying it. Well, I mean, I guess rich people do rich people things, but it was just super impressive. But they've got so many things like I know people will, I mean, some people are in the sports watch line talk about the Polaris and it being underappreciated. Probably the main one I hear about from watch collectors who aren't talking Reversos talk these ultra thins, these master ultra thins, and just how small. I mean, JLC isn't the record holder for thinnest watch, but they make some really approachable thin watches that often fall quite a bit on the secondhand market. And then, of course, the Reverso is their classic. But even with that, as I was noting, they have gone in and they have done more and more complicated things, like doing dual face Reversos, which was very, very cool. I do have a Reverso, but I couldn't bring myself to spring for a dual face even used. But I do like looking at them, and all the way up to the super ultra weird, high end, complicated sort of stuff that they've got. And so, I mean, JLC is an interesting one. And as Neff had noted about the movement thing, in a way, to me, that's a point in favor of them. There was a time. Nowadays, it seems like a lot of people feel that a watch isn't worth more than X, and let's say X is $2,000, unless they make their own in-house movement. And it's just an interesting demarcation. And the reason I say it's interesting is, quite frankly, most of us don't know anything really about movements. It's like, do you really, other than, unless it's giving you a feature or more power reserve or something, do you really care if the movement was an ETA or Tudor came up with a new thing and added $1,200 to the watch? I mean, I don't. But I do the same thing though. And I'm like, well, here's a micro brand that's wanting $2,000 and they're using a Solita. Am I really willing to go? Well, maybe, but 3,000, it's like, where do we draw those lines? And clearly back in the day, that wasn't a part of the discussion. It's like Patek, AP, Vacheron, they were all at some point or another using JLC movements. And people weren't whining that it was too expensive for a third-party movement. But times have changed, and hey, that's fine. So, as Neff has noted, in his opinion, JLC won. He did not see the poll, and he would have picked JLC over Rolex. And then Reviewmaster has said his Holy Trinity brands are JLC, Patek, and Audemars. They truly are beautifully made and have some gorgeous and unique designs. I mean, my used Reverso is my only JLC, and I've thought about. I mean, I like having in terms of my collecting style is I like to have a diversity of brands. I've deliberately not allowed myself to get more than 2 from any brand. So I've not looked yet really to acquire a second JLC. They like the ultra thin looks really cool as a dress watch style, but there's some other brands with dress watches that appeal to me. But so anyway, so JLC obviously ended up in the discussion. And let's see. I see Neff said his favorite brand doesn't make their own movements, and I would argue with anyone that would say it's not Holy Trinity quality, and that's Lorient Ferrier. I probably missaid that, so apologies. I missay a lot of words. But of the 5, that wasn't an option in the poll. The last option in the poll was all Longanzona, which got a lot of discussion in the last live stream. And as you can see, while it did not have a majority of the vote, it had the overwhelming plurality of the vote, with 41% of the respondents siding with ALS. And I don't think it's particularly surprising. Again, it depends how we're considering Trinity. I mean, obviously, of all of the brands that we discussed, well, I don't know about Grubel Forsey. I don't know where they're based. I assumed Switzerland, but maybe that's not true. All of the rest are Swiss, except ALS. German brand, very, very new. So it doesn't have a lot of heritage. I mean, it's younger than me. So, but that being said, very high-end watches. Their lowest end watch, I think, retails a little under 20,000. So they're about on par, I think, kind of where Patek's line is. And they go all the way up with very, very significant complications. One of the main things, though, about Longa that I think is noteworthy, though, is no matter, and we talked about this a little bit at the start, was no matter what version you get, their highest end watch or their entry low, it's which at 5 figures, I think, is a joke to call it that, but entry level watch, they put in the same effort, supposedly the same effort of finishing on the movements. It's so well refined as in terms of movement finishing that I know in the watches subreddit there's a running joke that if you post a picture of your ALS, if you do not include the movement photo, all you get are a bunch of comments saying that you have to pay the ALS tax, and the tax is you have to show us a picture of the back. Can't just show us the dial of an ALS. So, I mean, that reputation, I think, was coming through in that poll. And it's, but as we've noted, versus Patek, Vacheron, and AP, ALS watches, they do take a hit, quite a hit versus MSRP on the secondhand market. And in fact, that's probably part of the reason why I look at them longingly from time to time. Aside from, I really like the asymmetry of the Longa series, but I know a lot of people are really into things like, there was a recent piece about the titanium Odysseus, and then they've got these fancy, they do minute repeaters, and they've got the cool date stuff and their perpetuals and all of that, all of that sort of thing. So, I mean, they do get a lot of attention, but their secondhand pricing does show they are not, at least commercially, they are not at that same level once you get outside of the store versus the existing Holy Trinity. Review Master has said Cartier are nice as well. However, I personally do not count Rolex as anything other than expensive watches for the far less well-endowed fiscal customers. And we didn't, I can't remember if Cartier came up when we were having our discussions last week. I see Neff has mentioned Cartier has amazing watches and complications. I wish I'd gotten a Santos instead of trying to get a date just and wasting the last year and change. The site where it looks like a fat guy in a t-shirt. Well, it's not my preferred watch, but I picked it so that we could have a look at something other. I feel like anytime I do a stream and I show ALS, I end up throwing up pictures of the Longa because it's the one I like. And so this isn't all about me. So we got to show some others there. Here's something a little more classically looking, the Saxonia. But, and yeah, Cartier is an interesting brand. Actually, I've been looking at some of the Santos Dumonts, and we talked about that last week because I've been torn on. I kind of like the dressier look of the Santos Dumont that's steel, so it's a lot cheaper. It's also a quartz movement, which is, I mean, I have a few quartz watches, so I'm not a mechanical snob per se, but I mean, when you're talking Cartier price, it's sort of like, I'm still on the fence about it. I mean, it is I believe a movement either they developed or they had someone develop. That's one of the things with, Cartier is so, I shouldn't say weird, but they really walk that line, kind of like Tudor's been, though I feel like Tudor's trying to shed all of its third party. So maybe not. I mean, they've been using third party movements in the 1926 and continue to do so. But Cartier has been a brand that seems perfectly comfortable being like, you know what, we can do high end movement design ourselves, but we have absolutely no problem having lines and lines of watches and dropping in simple third-party movements too. So, and I think that's fine, probably. I mean, it's weird because when you talk to Cartier, when I've read quotes and interviews with them, they're always like, when you ask them about it, even though they are so established as watchmakers, they are still, as a company, saying, well, we're a jewelry company first and foremost. And it's like, well, you do pretty impressive work for a company that considers your watchmaking secondary. And from their profit and loss sheet, I did pull their financial reports at one point. I understand why. Jewelry is making them tons of money. So, but that's the poll. So I'll just throw that up here again, really, really briefly. But I guess just sort of to close out our discussions would be what other. I mean, we've been touching on this already, but what do you all think? Like, what should I have included in the poll that I didn't? So we had Longa, we had Journe, we had Grubel, we had JLC, and we had Rolex. I know we had Lorient Ferrier came up as an idea here. We had mention of Ulysse Nardin would have been a good one to include. Cartier here just cropped up as a brand that may have been worthy to put in the Holy Trinity poll. What are some other thoughts? I'll throw one out that no one in the chat has mentioned, though I know I named them briefly at one point. That would be H. Moser. I feel like a lot of people, myself included, whenever I hear them, my first thing I immediately just think is, oh yeah, they do the pretty expensive Fume dials, but they do some pretty impressive watchmaking. Pretty limited. Swiss, in fact, they are, I think they pride themselves on being more Swiss than many of the other Swiss manufacturers, just in terms of their criticism of the use of Swiss made when so much of the watch actually is not produced in Switzerland. And, that's an interesting sort of almost a made in America sort of debate that we would have here back in the day, 80s and 90s, when you'd argue, our big debates were, well, should you buy a Ford or a Chevy because that's an American brand? And then it's like, yeah, well, the parts aren't, like Ford assembles in Mexico and Toyota's assembling in Alabama. So which is the more American company, sort of thing? Interesting question that's sort of come up apparently in the watch industry, at least when it comes to Switzerland. But in a way, it's obviously very arbitrary. As I noted, there's no council that controls who the Holy Trinity is or is not. So we are, it will always be Patek, AP, and Vacheron until Vacheron goes out of business. Or, I mean, I'm not saying they are, but if one of the three was to, it would be Vacheron. But I don't know. Intellectually, it's sort of an interesting thing. And then you get the question that we had kind of with Grubel, Forsey, but independence. Do you have to produce a certain amount? Should you have to be of scale? Is Journe still too small? Should you have to be able to at least make 1,000 watches a year to be worthy of Holy Trinity? If no one can acquire your ultra, handcrafted thing, I mean, someone can go in and build the best, dresser set as a carpenter the world's ever seen. But if he only does one a year, I mean, do we really put that on a pedestal and call it a company? It's kind of like that. Some of these, in my opinion, I think I'm laying my bias show here. In my opinion, some of these entities that do the super high end, and we had a few of them named on the last live stream, I think they're just way too small to ever truly be considered a Holy Trinity company. But I would also throw a Rolex out of this, because I do think that Holy Trinity should require that the company be able to produce very high complication watches. So, and maybe Rolex has in the past, but I want beyond a moon phase and a chronograph. I'm talking like minute repeaters. I don't know about tourbillons. I'm probably not pronouncing that right. The tourbillons anymore. I don't know. It's never, that one's a weird one for me, because it's a complication that doesn't impress me, and it should. I'm not being fair, but like, because it doesn't seem to have very much functional purpose in a wristwatch, I can't. It's I'm going to pull a line from Jurassic Park. You were so busy to see that you didn't stop to ask yourself if you should. It's like that for me. I'm like, it's an interesting complication. I respect the engineering behind it, but given that I don't think it really offers a practical purpose, I like, maybe you should climb a mountain because it's there, but I don't know if necessarily you should put it in a watch because it's there. But hey, people love them. They love the look at them. So it isn't, my favorite complication is the minute repeater. I don't think I'll ever see one that's affordable enough for me to get. But who knows? It's just a cool toy. But anyway, I think that will be it for the stream. So thanks for everyone who voted in the poll, and thank you everyone who chose to stop by on the channel. Oh, I see we got some more chats. So Neff has said, I don't like the tourbillon on the front of the dial. Patek keeps them off the dial. I love that, but I do think they look cool. And I think I should have confirmed this. I think Longa made a watch. If I only read about it, I didn't see pictures, and I think they hid the tourbillon. Like they put it behind a main plate or something and hid it so the owner couldn't even see it. Now, that's an engineering flex. It's like, we're going to put in this useless, it's not going to really improve the timing of the watch, and we're going to stick it in there and we're going to hide it so you can't even look at it. But I think Patek does that on like they hide a diamond between the lugs on some of their watches, or all of their, I don't know, maybe it's their platinum watches. I don't remember. Someone told me that there's like a diamond they inset in between the lugs. It's just a brand thing, and you can't see it because the watch band's in the way. But they do it because it's Patek, and that's what they do. See, a review master said he bought his wife a solar Cartier tank. I was talking about the quartz in my push pull on Cartier. Solar's totally different for me, though. If there was a solar Santos, I probably would have already bought it. When that solar tank came out, I thought that was so badass. I have a G-Shock, that solar, obviously, and it's the radio sync, so it's my most accurate watch. But solar beat, so my biggest complaint about quartz isn't that it's quartz. It's not that. It's that I don't like having to have the battery changed every 2 or 3 years, but solar solves that. And it has like a 16-year service interval on that. Now the Santos Dumont quartzes are 6 year service, and I can change my own batteries. It's not a big deal. I think they just use flathead screws on the back of that case. I've changed about 24 watches at this point, but most of those are cheap though, so who cares if I screw them up? But that solar beat, totally cool. The only reason why I didn't go after the solar beat tank was simply because since I already have a Reverso, I already have a rectangular watch, and I had already done that internal debate before the solar tank was out, and sided with the Arabic numerals. I prefer Arabics usually over Roman, so I like the dial better. That's why I went with a Reverso. It wasn't that it reverses; it was just the dial. And so that's why with the Santos, though, as being a square watch rather than a rectangle. I know they're kind of the same, but they're not. They're different. And that's where, for me, it's been the difference has been like, I kind of want that because it's different enough. But I was so hoping at Watches and Wonders this year that they were, Cartier they had to have spent a ton of money on R&D to do that. So, it's a regular dial. They did the solar panels behind the Roman numerals. It's so smart. It's so smart. And surely they're going to put it in other watches, right? They got to. But as Neff has noted, it's like you can't find them anywhere. Congrats to Review Master being able to find one. I've had people contact me about the solar tank saying they just can't get them. They just cannot get them. They've been able to get some of the other tank musts, but not the solars. It's been real tough. Australia must have a super special secret supply. But anyway, so now I'll go ahead and end it. So, all right, that'll be it. And everybody, I hope y'all have a great end of your week and weekend. And I don't know what my next video will be. I don't have anything planned yet. We'll just have to wait and see. But talk to you guys sometime in the future. See ya.